Hey, Vinyl Community, Jeff back again. Figured I'd go ahead and do the video for the second store. As I spoke about in my last video, I went to 2 record stores in Columbia, South Carolina while I am here. I did fail to mention, though, I want to briefly mention this. Before we went to any of those stores, we went to a different part of town. We had to do some other things and ran across the Second and Charles chain store. We have them in our area, too. They have records. Went in there, you know, because sometimes you might stumble across something in the used bin that you just have to have. So that's what I'm always looking for. I know the Second and Charles prices are about as bad as shopping at Barnes & Noble. I mean, they are overly priced for the most part on just about everything. Case in point, there was an album in there, the only album I saw, that was actually wrapped in the, you know, the tag, the protective security band, had the little, you know, black circle thing with the strings wrapped around it. This album was in that, and they were selling it for $69. And I looked at that and I just scratched my head because I bought this album on Amazon maybe 2 months ago for $25. And that's an extreme view. Most of the records in the store were in $40, and I'm like, this is under $30 every day of the week on Amazon, and you're selling it for $42. Everything was in the mid-30s, which is about average, but it's like these can easily be found for under $30 in most places. And it's just, so they're just a retail store. They mark the albums at the retail price for the most part, and they just let it ride. They don't adjust over time for, I don't know. I never see them adjust over time. I remember it wasn't even maybe 3 years ago when I went to Second and Charles, and there were quite a few deals and quite a great decent prices, but they, like so many others, have kind of jacked it up. So everything, they have a decent selection. They have a section, you know, they have a metal section, which is nice, and decent selection, but, you know, everything's pretty expensive. There was a couple albums in the mid-20s range, but I'm like, I can get those every day of the week for that same price or less other places. So I didn't want to buy just to buy. I wanted to buy something that just had to be that I had to have, that was not available everywhere else. So I found nothing there, but it was nice to kind of check around and see if they had anything used. Not a whole lot of used stuff at this particular one compared to like the one that I have in my town. Beyond that, we went there, we did some other things, and then we eventually made it to the record store that I covered in my last video. Then the next day, we stayed the night there in Columbia. Now, next day we got up and we were doing some shopping and stuff, and I said, well, let's hit one more store. So we went to the west side of town and hit one more store. Again, I did not get a lot of footage in there. This place was pretty massive, but had really small rows, and it just, again, wasn't really set up to be easily recorded in there the way that the place was. But this store has, I don't even know how a store like this can maintain what they've got. I mean, it's obviously got to be computerized. This store was packed to the gills with comics, CDs, the bobbleheads, comic paraphernalia, toys galore. You walk into this place and it was just things on the shelves everywhere, so high and everything, that I'm wondering how you would find anything in there. I mean, obviously you go in there, they probably got everything you're looking for. It was comics and music, and like I said, they have action figures, they have everything like that. Tons and tons of the bobbleheads and tons of figures and comic paraphernalia and movies. Oh my gosh, movies, DVDs. And then you get past all of that through these little slim rows. You're going back through the store and you get to the back. It's a deep store. You get to the back end and it's just all records. And again, it was mostly new stuff. They did have some used stuff. I did find an album in the used stuff, but it was mostly a lot of new stuff, and it was just typical standard prices. There was nothing there that really stood out as, you know, a great deal, other than, you know, stuff that you could buy. New stuff, a lot of new stuff. But here, real briefly, is just me going into the store. All right, so we're at store number 2 now. We're in a place in town. They got movies and comics and all that. It's hard to see, it's in the rain, so I'm just gonna go on in here and see what you got. Okay, so that was mainly more just me, you know, outside the store. I didn't really get any footage in the store because it was, like I said, it was pretty tight, and there were people most everywhere. So went back, looked through all. They had a whole heavy metal section. I looked through all that. It was mostly modern metal, and it was mostly all new stuff. Nuclear Blast, you know, lots and lots and lots of bands, modern bands that I'm like, oh, I wouldn't mind having this. A lot of stuff I wouldn't mind having, but stuff you can get pretty much anywhere. Nothing that had to go home with me. I did look through the used section, which was just rock, and that's where they did have some stuff mingled in there. And I looked in the newly received used stuff. And it appears that somebody had recently dumped some Japanese imports. So they had like, but it was mostly stuff like bootleggy type concerts. They had a Quiet Riot bootleg from the Metal Health area. But you know, it was like $50 or so for a Japanese import. And they had quite a few Japanese imports of some 80s type bands, Iron Maiden and stuff like that, but they were priced accordingly. $60, $70, $80. And some were Japanese releases of, you know, actual studio albums. But again, I wasn't looking to dump any money. I'm not a super avid collector of Japanese stuff. I love some. I'd love to have some. I have some. I'd love to have more. But, you know, when the cost is like that, like I said, I saw quite a few Iron Maiden ones that were, you know, they had 3 or 4 Iron Maiden type live things that were just, you know, $50, $60, $70, $80. I'm like, usually I see a lot of places have a lot of Kiss ones. I didn't see any real Kiss stuff here. But anyway, they had a lot of stuff, but not a lot of used stuff that really jumped out that I needed to have. The only thing I did find, and this is a band I'm sure nobody on this channel watching me is going to know, Vector, Mannequin Virtue, 1983 new wave synth type band. Back in 1984, I had their Please Stand By album. I never have had this album. I have it digitally over the years since then, but I saw this album 2-3 years ago in a mall in my area, and I really wanted to buy it, but it had a pretty bad mark on it. This one looks brand new. Now, again, I'm sure nobody knows who this is. California band. Like I said, I discovered them in '84, fell in love with that one album, and they had like another album after that. They had this one first in '83, and then they disappeared for the longest time. And then I think about 2 years ago, they came back and put a new album out, which I purchased. Steve Griffith is the main guy, vocalist, and everything, and he's a Facebook friend now, so that's cool. The early stuff has Charlie Peacock on vocals. He went on after this to do all kinds of stuff, solo, lots of stuff. Jimmy Abeg has done a lot of music too. This particular album has Aaron Smith on drums. Aaron Smith was the drummer for a long time of the 77s, which I'm sure you've heard me talk about because they're one of my favorite bands. 77s are on the same label, Exit Records, so it kind of makes sense that he was on here. They all kind of work together. Exit Records was a small label in California. It existed from 82 to like 87 or 89. Where did I see that at? 82 to 87. And most of the stuff would have been of a Christian nature, and so they were a smaller Christian label. They were picked up by A&M Records for distribution, later by Island Records for distribution. Island Records, of course, had U2 on it, so they had some of those bands that tinkered on the spiritual side of things. Quite a few of the bands like that, I believe. So it kind of fell into place with that, but then the label folded in '87. But the 77s did some stuff on there. A band called First Strike. Lots and lots of Charlie Peacock. And then the Vector stuff came out. So to find a copy of this album in pretty pristine condition, I was thrilled. And it was only like $6. I mean, this one actually looked unplayed. And then, I just was thrilled to get this because I've been looking for a copy of this for a long time. Like I said, I picked up their 2020-21 album. It came back. I think it was a fundraiser one of those Kickstarter type programs, or one of those, or maybe it was just a pre-order that I picked up. And yeah, so I love this. This is just one of those bands back in the early '80s when I was looking for stuff to listen to, when I was getting more into my only listening to Christian music in the mid '80s. Their second album, I was picking up anything new wave and poppy that I could get into that was a little edgier, more so than contemporary worship and church music, and Vector fell into place with that because, you know, at that time I got into the 77s and Vector and bands like that. So first album, wanted to grab it. Great stuff. Only thing that I found there, again, they had a lot of stuff, but it was a lot of stuff that was just normal stuff. And they had that, you know, I'm like, ooh, I had a new Dokken album in my hands. But again, they were all just retail prices, nothing that was really catching my eye on sale. Again, while I'm living away from home here, I'm not trying to go crazy and just buy anything and everything, trying to buy stuff that is really desirable and that I really would want to have in my collection. So I grabbed that because I really wanted that. And that way I feel like I'm not walking out of the store with nothing, at least. That's it for this one, though. Thanks for watching. Rock on and rock on.